I heard the sound. A hollow metal tapping, as if someone was rapping on the side of an empty gasoline can with a piece of copper pipe. Stupidly, I didn't associate it with gunfire at first, and I kept trudging forward, leading my horse by the reins. Then the bullets found their range, and they smashed into the ground, our column, and the rock walls around us. The men scrambled for cover. I fell to the ground, grinding my face into the dust of the stony path and telling myself that it wasn't really happening, that I hadn't seen the man in front of me ripped open across his back as he stumbled forward. Our men began firing from all around me, and rapid breathing the dust into my mouth, stiff with fear. I was in the war. I might have stayed there, with my face in the dirt and my heart thumping seismic terror into the earth, if it wasn't for my horse. I'd lost the reins, and the horse was rearing in fright. Fearing that it might trample me, I scrambled to my feet and scrabbled at the flailing reins to regain control of her. The horse that had been so impressively obedient to that point was suddenly the worst of the entire column. She reared and then bucked. She stamped her hooves and tried to drag me backward. She thrashed and drove us in tight circles, trying to find an angle where she could kick backward at me. She even bit me, snapping at my forearm and causing intense pain through 3 layers of clothes. I glanced along the line, left and right. Those nearest to the pass were making a run for it, leading their animals toward the rocky shelves for shelter. Those immediately in front of me and behind me had managed to bring their horses down, and they crouched beside or behind them. Only my horse was still rearing and widely visible. Without a horseman's skill, it's a damn hard thing to convince a horse to lie down in a battle zone. Other horses were screaming in fear, and each whinny of terror put more panic into mine. I wanted to save her, to bring her down and make less of a target of her, but I was afraid for myself as well. The enemy fire slammed into the rocks above and beside me, and with every shattering sound I flinched like a deer nudging a thorn hedge. It's a bizarre feeling, waiting for a bullet to strike. The nearest experience I can recall that's anything like it is falling through space, and waiting for the safety chute to open. There's a special taste, a unique taste. There's a different smell on your skin. And there's a hardness in the eyes, as if they're suddenly made of cold metal. Just when I decided to give up and let the animal fend for herself, she buckled easily and followed my dragging arms down and onto her side. I hurled myself down with her, using her swollen middle as a shield. In an attempt to calm her, I reached over to pat at her shoulder. My hand squelched in a bloody wound. Raising my head, I saw that the horse had been struck twice, once high on the shoulder and once in the belly. The wounds were streaming blood with every heaving breath, and the horse was crying. I have no other word for it. The sound was a breathy, stuttering, whining sob. I put my head against hers, and wrapped my arm around her neck. The men in my group concentrated their fire on a ridge about 150 meters away. With my body pressed hard against the ground, I peeked over the mane of my horse to see dusty plumes rise and spill over the distant ridge as bullet after bullet rammed into the earth. And then it was over. I heard Cater shouting in 3 languages for the men to stop shooting. We waited for long minutes, in a stillness that groaned and moaned and sobbed. I heard footsteps crunching the stones nearby, and looked up to see Khalid and Sari running toward me at a crouch. "Are you okay, Lynn?" "Yeah," I answered, wondering then for the first time if I, too, had been shot. I ran my hands over my legs and arms. "Yeah, I'm all here. I think I'm still in one piece. But they shot my horse. She's..." "I'm doing a count," he interrupted me, holding up the palms of both hands to calm me and stop me speaking. "Cater sent me to see if you're okay and do a head count. I'll be back soon. Stay here and don't move. But she's finished," he hissed and then softened his tone. "The horse is gone, Lynn. She's done for. She's not the only one. Habib's gonna finish them off. Just stay here and keep your head down. I'll be back." He ran off at a crouch, stopping here and there along the column behind me. My horse was breathing hard, whimpering with every third or fourth chugging breath. The flow of blood was slow but steady. The wound in her belly was oozing a dark fluid that was darker than blood. I tried to soothe her, stroking her neck, and then I realized that I hadn't given her a name. It seemed grievously cruel, somehow, for her to die without a name. I searched my mind, and when I pulled the net of thought up from the blue-black deep, there was a name, glittering and true. "I'm going to call you Claire," I whispered into the mare's ear. She was a beautiful girl. She always made me look good, wherever we went. When I was with her, I always looked like I knew what I was doing. And I didn't start to love her, really, until she walked away from me for the last time. She said I was interested in everything and committed to nothing. She said that to me once. And she was right. She was right. I was babbling, raving, in shock. I know the symptoms now. I've seen other men under fire for the first time. A rare few know exactly what to do. Their weapons are returning fire before their bodies have finished an instinctive crouch and roll. Others laugh, and can't stop laughing. Some cry, and call for their mama, or their wife, or their God. Some get so quiet, shrinking down inside themselves, that even their friends get spooked by it. And some talk, just like I talked to my dying horse. Habib scrambled up to me in a slithering, zigzag run, and saw me talking into the mare's ear. He checked her over thoroughly, running his hands over the wounds and probing under the thickly veined hide to feel for the bullets. He pulled his knife out of its scabbard. It was a long knife, with a dog's tooth point. He positioned it over the horse's throat and then paused. His mad eyes met mine. There was a sunburst of gold around the pupils of his eyes that seemed to pulse and whirl. They were big eyes, but the madness in them was bigger, straining and bulging at them as if it wanted to burst outward from his very brain. And yet he was sane enough to sense my helpless grief, and to offer me the knife. It may be that I should have taken the knife and killed the horse, myself. Maybe that's what a good man, a committed man, would have done. I couldn't. I looked at the knife and the trembling throat of the horse, and I couldn't do it. I shook my head. Habib pushed the knife into the horse's neck and gave it a subtle, almost elegant twist of his wrist. The mare shuddered, but allowed herself to be calmed. When the knife left her throat, the blood gushed in heart-thrusted bursts onto her chest and the sodden ground. Slowly, the straining jaw relaxed, and the eyes glazed over, and then the great heart was still. I looked from the gentle, dead, unfearing eyes of the horse into the sickness that careered in Habib's eyes, and the moment that we shared was so charged with emotion, so surreally alien to the worlds I knew, that my hand slid involuntarily along my body to the gun in my holster. Habib grinned at me, a toothy baboon grin that was impossible to read, and scrambled away along the line to the next wounded horse. "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" "What?" I said, "Are you okay?" Khalid asked, shaking a handful of clothing at my chest until I looked him in the eye. "Yeah, sure." I focused on his face, wondering how long I'd been staring at my dead horse, with my hand resting on her punctured throat. I looked around me at the sky. The night was close, only minutes away. How bad was it? We lost one man, Majid, a local guy. I saw it. He was right in front of me. The bullets cut him open like a can opener. Fuck, man, it was so quick. He was alive, and then his back opened up, and he dropped over like a cut puppet. I'm sure he was dead before his knees hit the ground. It was that fast. "Are you sure you're okay?" Khalid asked when I paused for breath. "Of course I'm fucking okay," I snapped, a purely Australian accent punching into the expletive. The gleam in his eyes goaded me for another heartbeat of vexation, and I almost shouted at him, but then I saw the warmth in his expression and the concern. I laughed instead. Relieved, he laughed with me. "Of course I'm okay. And I'd be a lot better if you'd stop asking me. I'm just a bit talkative, that's all. Gimme some slack. Jesus. A man just got killed on one side of me, and my horse got killed on the other side. I don't know whether I'm lucky or jinxed." "You're lucky," Khalid answered quickly. His tone was more serious than his laughing eyes. "It's a mess, but it could have been worse." "Worse?" They didn't use anything heavy, no mortars, no heavy machine guns. They would have used them if they had them, and it would have been a lot worse. That means it was a small patrol, probably Afghans, not Russians, just testing us out or trying their luck. As it is, we've got 3 wounded, and we lost 4 horses. Where are the wounded guys? Up ahead, in the pass. You want to take a look at them with me? Sure. Gimme a hand with my gear. We wrenched the saddle and bridle from my dead horse, and trotted up the line of men and horses to the mouth of the narrow pass. The wounded men were lying within the cover of a shoulder of rock. Kader stood nearby, frowning watchfully at the plain behind me. Ahmedzadeh was gently but hurriedly removing the clothing from one of the wounded men. I glanced at the darkening sky. One man had a broken arm. His horse had fallen on him when it was shot. The break was a bad one, a compound fracture of the forearm, near the wrist. One bone protruded at a sickeningly unnatural angle, but it remained within the envelope of flesh, and nowhere pierced the skin. It had to be set. When Ahmedzadeh removed the second man's shirt, we saw that he'd been shot twice. Both bullets were still in his body, and they were too deep to reach without major surgery. One, in the upper chest, had shattered the collarbone, and the other had lodged in his stomach, tearing a wide and undoubtedly fatal wound from hip to hip. The third man, a farmer named Siddiqui, had a bad head wound. His horse had thrown him against the rocks, and he'd struck a boulder with the top of his head near the crown. It was bleeding, and there was a clear fracture of the cranium. My fingers slid along the ridge of broken bone, greasy wet with his blood. The broken scalp had split into 3 chunks. One of them was so loose that I knew it would come away in my hand if I tugged at it. His matted hair was all that held his skull together. There was also a thick swelling at the base of the skull, where his head met his neck. He was unconscious, and I doubted that he would ever open his eyes again. I glanced at the sky once more. There was so little daylight left, so little time. I had to make a decision, a choice, and help one man to live, maybe, while I let other men die. I wasn't a doctor, and I had no experience under fire. The work had fallen to me, it seemed, because I knew a little more than the next man, and I was willing to do it. It was cold. I was cold. I was kneeling in a sticky smear of blood, and I could feel it soaking through the knees of my pants. When I looked up at Kader, he nodded, as if he was reading my thoughts. Feeling sick with guilt and fear, I pulled a blanket over Siddiqui, to keep him warm, and then I abandoned him to work on the man with the broken arm. Khalid pulled open the comprehensive first aid kit beside me. I threw a plastic bottle of antibiotic powder, antiseptic wash, bandages, and scissors on the ground at Ahmedzadeh's feet, beside the man who'd been shot. I snapped out brief instructions for cleaning and dressing the wounds, and as Ahmed went to work, covering the bullet wounds, I turned my attention to the broken arm. The man spoke to me urgently. I knew his face well. He had a special talent for herding the unruly goats, and I'd often seen the temperamental creatures following him, unbidden, as he wandered around our camp. What did he say? I didn't get it. He asked you if it's going to hurt, Khalid muttered, trying to keep his voice and his expression reassuringly neutral. I had this happen to me once, I said in reply. Something just like this. I know exactly how much it hurts. It hurts so much, brother, that I think you should take his gun away. Right, Khalid replied. Fuck. He smiled broadly, and brushed at the ground beside the wounded man, gradually easing the Kalashnikov out of the man's hand and out of reach. Then, as darkness closed over us, and 5 of the man's friends held him down, I wrenched and twisted his shattered arm until it resembled the straight, healthy limb that it once had been and never would be again. Allah! Allah! He shouted, over and over through clenched teeth. When the break was wrapped and set with hard plastic splints, and we'd patched over the wounds on the man who'd been shot, I hastily wrapped a dressing around unconscious Siddiqui's head. At once we set off into the narrow pass. The cargo was distributed among all the remaining horses. The man with the bullet wounds rode a horse, supported on both sides by his friends. Siddiqui was strapped across one of the pack horses, as was the body of Majid, the Afghan who'd been killed in the attack. The rest of us walked. The climb was steep but short. Puffing hard in the thin air and shivering in a cold that penetrated to my bones, I pushed and dragged the reluctant horses with the rest of the men. The Afghan fighters never once complained or grumbled. When the pitch of one climb was steeper than anything I'd known on the whole trip, I paused at last, panting heavily to regain my strength. 2 men turned to see that I'd halted, and they slid down the path to me, giving up the precious meters they'd just gained. With huge smiles and encouraging claps on the shoulder, they helped me to drag a horse up the slope and then bounded off to help those ahead. These Afghans may not be the best men in the world to live with, Ahmedzadeh puffed as he struggled up the scrambling trail behind me. But they are certainly the best men in the world to die with. After 5 hours of the climb we reached our destination, a camp in the Shar-I-Safa mountains. The camp was sheltered from the air by a prodigious ledge of rock. The ground beneath had been excavated to form a vast cave leading to a network of other caves. Several smaller, camouflaged bunkers surrounded the cave in a ring that reached to the fringe of the flat, rugged mountain plateau. Kader called us to a halt in the light of the rising full moon. His scout Habib had alerted the camp to our arrival, and the Mujahedin were waiting for us, and the supplies we brought, with great excitement. A message was sent back to me, in the center of the column, that Kader wanted me. I jogged forward to join him. We will ride into the camp along this path. Khalid, Ahmed, Nazir, Mahmoud, and some others. We do not know exactly who is in the camp. The attack on us at Shabad Pass tells me that Azmatullah Achakzai has changed sides again, and joined the Russians. The pass has been his for 3 years, and we should have been safe there. Habib tells me that the camp is friendly, and that these are our own men, waiting for us. But they are still behind cover, and they will not come out to greet us. I think it will be better for us if our American is riding with us, near the front, behind me. I cannot tell you to do this. I can only ask it. Will you ride with us? Yes, I replied, hoping that the word sounded firmer in his ears than it did in my own. Good. Nazir and the others have prepared the horses. We will leave at once. Nazir led several horses forward, and we climbed wearily into the saddles. Kader must have been far more tired than I was, and his body must have wrestled with many more pains and complaints, but he was straight-backed in the saddle and he held the green and white standard at his hip with a rigid arm. Imitating him, I sat up straight and kicked back smartly to start the horse forward. Our small column moved off slowly into a silvered moonlight so strong that it cast looming shadows on the gray rock walls. The approach to the camp from that southern climb was along a narrow stone path that swept in a graceful, even curve from right to left. Beside the path on our left was a steep drop of some 30 meters to a rubble of broken boulders. On our right was the smooth rock face of a sheer wall. When we were perhaps halfway along the path, watched attentively by our own men and the Mujahedin in the camp, I developed an irritating cramp in my right hip. The cramp quickly became a piercing knot of pain, and the more that I tried to ignore it, the more agonizing it felt. Attempting to relieve the stress on my hip, I took my right foot out of the stirrup and tried to stretch my leg. With all the weight on my left leg, I stood a little in the saddle. Without warning, my left foot gave way beneath me as my boot slipped from the stirrup, and I felt myself falling sideways out of the saddle toward the deep, hard drop to the stones. Self-preservation instincts set my limbs flailing, and I clutched at the horse's neck with my arms and my free right leg as I swung down and around. In the time it takes to clench your teeth, I'd fallen from the saddle and coiled myself upside down around the neck of the horse. I called on it to stop, but it ignored me, plodding onward along the narrow track. I couldn't let go. The path was so narrow, and the drop so steep, that I was sure I would fall if I released my grip. And the horse wouldn't stop. So I hung on, with my arms and my legs wrapped around its neck, upside down, while its head gently bobbed and dipped next to mine. I heard my own men laughing first. It was that helpless, stuttering, choking laughter that makes men suffer for days with the ache of it in their ribs. It was the kind of laughter that you're sure will kill you if you can't get that next gasping breath. And then I heard the Mujahedin fighters laughing from the camp. And I arched my head backward to see Kader, facing around in his saddle and laughing as hard as the rest. And then I started to laugh, and when the laughter weakened my arms, as I clutched at the horse, I laughed again. And as I choked out an anguished, croaky "Whoa! Stop!"
Banned Karo. The men laughed harder than ever. And so I entered the camp of the Mujahedin fighters. Men crouched around me at once, helping me from the horse's neck and steadying me on my feet. My own column of men followed us across the narrow path, and reached out to pat me on the back and slap at my shoulders.
Seeing that familiarity, the Mujahedin joined in the slapping chorus, and it was fully 15 minutes before the last man left my side and I could sit down to rest my jelly legs.
Getting you to ride with him wasn't Kader's best ever idea, Khalid Ansari said, sliding down a boulder face to sit beside me with his back to the stone. But fuck, man, you are real popular after that trick. That's easily the funniest thing those guys have ever seen in their lives. For Christ's sake, I sighed, with a last reflexive giggle of laughter. I rode over 100 mountains and crossed 10 rivers, most of it in the dark, for a whole month, and everything was okay. I roll into the camp, and I'm hanging on my horse's neck like a fucking monkey. Don't get me started again. Khalid spluttered, laughing and clutching at his side. I laughed with him, and although I was exhausted and resigned to the ridicule, I didn't want to laugh anymore, so I glanced around to my right to avoid his eye. A canvas shamiana in camouflage colors provided shelter for our wounded men. In the shadows beside it, men were pulling cargo from the horses and ferrying it into the cavern. I saw Habib dragging something long and heavy away from behind the working line and deeper into the darkness beyond. "What's?" I began, still chuckling. "What's Habib doing over there?" Khalid was instantly alert and jumped to his feet. His urgency quickened me, and I leapt up after him. We ran to the line of rocks that formed one edge of the flattened mountain plateau, and as we rounded them we saw him kneeling, legs astride the body of a man. It was Siddiqui. While all the attention was on the fascinating bundles of the cargo, Habib had dragged the unconscious man from beneath the canvas awning. Just as we reached him, Habib drove his long knife into the man's neck and gave it that delicate twist. Siddiqui's legs twitched a tiny, trembling shake and then were still. Habib pulled the knife away and turned to see us staring back at him. The horror and rage in our faces seemed only to fuel the burning madness in his eyes. He grinned at us. "Kader!" Khalid shouted, his face as pale as the moon-washed stone around us. "Kaderbai! Idarau! Come here!" I heard an answering shout from behind us somewhere, but I didn't move. My eyes were on Habib. He turned to face me, swinging his leg over the murdered man and crouching on his haunches as if he was about to spring at me. The manic grin locked on his features, but his eyes grew darker, more afraid, perhaps, or more cunning. He turned his head quickly and tilted it at an eccentric angle, as if listening with feral intensity to a faint sound in the distant night. I heard nothing but the noises of the camp behind me and the soft wail of the wind as it coursed through the canyons and ravines and secret pathways. In that instant, the land, the mountains, the very country of Afghanistan seemed to me so desolate, so bleached of loveliness and tenderness that it was like the landscape of Habib's insanity. I felt that I was trapped inside the stony maze of his hallucinated brain. While he listened, tense in his animal crouch, with his face turned away from me, I slipped the stud clip off my holster. I eased the gun out and into my hands. Breathing hard, I followed Kader's instructions automatically, not realizing until it was done that I'd flicked off the safety, chambered around by pulling back the sliding return, and cocked the hammer. The sounds brought Habib round to face me. He looked at the gun in my hand. It was aimed at his chest. He looked back to my eyes, moving his gaze slowly, almost languorously. The long knife was still in his hand. I don't know what expression lit my face in the moonlight. It can't have been good. My mind was made up. If he moved a millimeter toward me, I would pull the trigger as many times as it took to finish him. His grin widened into a laugh, at least, it looked like a laugh. His mouth moved and his head shook, but there was no sound. And his eyes, ignoring Khalid completely, stared a message into mine. And then I could hear him, hear his voice in my head. "You see," his eyes said to me, "I'm right not to trust any of you. You want to kill me. All of you. You want me dead? But it's all right. I don't mind. I give you my permission. I want you to do it." We heard a sound, a footstep, behind us. Khalid and I jumped and whirled in fright to see Kader, Nazir, and Ahmedzadeh rushing to join us. When we looked back, Habib was gone. What is wrong? Kader asked. It's Habib, Khalid answered, searching the darkness for a sign of the madman. He went crazy. He is crazy. He killed Siddiqui, dragged his body here, and stabbed him in the throat. Where he is? Nazir demanded angrily. I don't know, Khalid replied, shaking his head. Did you see him go, Lin? No, I turned with you, to see Kader, and when I looked back he was just gone. I think he must have jumped down into the ravine.
He can't have jumped, Khalid frowned.
It's gotta be 50 yards down there. He can't have jumped. Abdul Kader was kneeling beside the dead man, whispering prayers with his hands held palms upwards. We can look for him tomorrow, Ahmed said, putting a comforting hand on Khalid's shoulder. He looked up at the night sky. There is not much of this moonlight left for us to work. We still have a lot to do. Don't worry. If he's still around here, we will find him tomorrow. And if we do not, if he is gone, perhaps it is not the worst for us, Non. I want the guard to watch for him tonight, Khalid ordered. Our own guys. The men who know Habib well, not the guys from here. We, Zadeh agreed. I don't want them to shoot him, if they can help it, Khalid continued, but I don't want them to take any chances, either. Make a check of all his stuff. Check his horse and his pack. See what weapons or explosives he might have had on him. I didn't get too good a look before, but I think he had some stuff under his jacket. Fuck, this is a mess. Don't worry, Zadeh muttered, putting a hand on Khalid's shoulder once more. I can't help it, the Palestinian insisted, looking around him into the darkness. It's a fucking bad start. I think he's out there, staring at us, right now. When Kader completed his prayers, we carried Siddiqui's body back to the canvas shamiana, and wrapped it in cloth until the rituals of burial could be performed on the following day. We worked for a few hours more and then lay down in the cavern, side by side for sleep. The snoring was loud, and the exhausted men were restless in their slumber, but I lay awake for other reasons. My eyes kept drifting back to the place, moonless and thickly shadowed, where Habib had disappeared. Khalid was right. It had started badly, Kader's war, and the words echoed in my wakeful mind. A bad start. I tried to fix my eyes on the clear and perfect stars of that fated night's black heaven, but again and again my concentration lapsed, and I found myself staring at the dark edge of the plateau. And I knew, in the way we know without a word that love is lost, or in the sudden, sure way we know that a friend is false and doesn't really like us at all, that Kader's war would end much worse, for all of us, than it had begun. Chapter 34. For 2 months of cold and ever colder days we lived with the guerrilla fighters in their cave complex on the Shar-i-Safa range. They were hard months in many ways, but our mountain stronghold never came under direct fire, and we were relatively safe. The camp was only 50 kilometers from Kandahar. It was about 20 kilometers from the main Kabul highway and about 50 kilometers southeast of the Arghandab Dam. The Russians occupied Kandahar, but their hold on the southern capital was tenuous and the city was subject to recurring sieges. Rockets had been fired into the city center, and guerrilla fighting on the outskirts claimed a steady toll of lives. The main highway was in the hands of several well-armed Mujahideen units. Russian tank and truck convoys from Kabul were forced to blast their way through blockades to resupply Kandahar, and that they did, from month to month. Afghan regular army units loyal to the Kabul puppet government protected the strategically important Arghandab Dam, but frequent attacks on the dam threatened their hold on the precious resource. Thus we were roughly in the center of a triad of violent conflict zones, each of which constantly demanded new men and guns. The Shar-i-Safa range offered no strategic advantage to our enemies, so the fighting didn't find us in our well-disguised mountain caverns. The weather shifted during those weeks to the cold heart of a severe winter. Snow fell in fitful gusts and squalls that left us sodden in our many-layered patchwork uniforms. A freezing mist drifted so slowly through the mountains that it sometimes hung suspended for hours at a time, still and white and as impenetrable to the gaze as frosted glass. The ground was always muddy or frozen, and even the stone walls of the caves we lived in seemed to ring and tremble with the icy chill of the season. Part of Kader's cargo had consisted of hand tools and machine components. We'd set up 2 workshops in the first days after our arrival, and they were busy throughout the creeping weeks of the winter. There was a small capstan lathe, which we'd bolted to a homemade table. The lathe ran on a diesel engine. The fighters felt certain that there were no enemy forces within earshot, but still we dampened its noise with a little igloo of burlap sacks that covered the engine, leaving gaps for the air inlet and exhaust gas outlet. The same engine powered a grinding wheel and a speed drill. With that assembly, the fighters repaired their weapons and sometimes adapted them to suit new and different purposes. First among those weapons were the mortars. After aircraft and tanks, the most effective battle weapon in Afghanistan was the Russian 82mm mortar. The guerrillas bought the mortars, stole them, or captured them in hand-to-hand fighting, often at the cost of human lives. The weapons were then turned on the Russians, who'd brought them into the country in order to conquer it. Our workshops stripped the mortars down, refitted them, and packed them in waxed bags for use in combat zones as far away as Zaranj in the west, and Kunduz in the north. Apart from the cartridge pliers and crimping tools, the ammunition and the explosives, Kader's cargo also included new parts for the Kalashnikovs that he'd purchased in the arms bazaars in Peshawar. The Russian AK, Avtomat Kalashnikova, was designed by Mikhail Kalashnikov in the 1940s, in response to German armament innovations. Toward the end of the Second World War, German army generals disobeyed the explicit orders of Adolf Hitler and produced an automatic assault rifle. The armaments engineer Hugo Schmeisser, using the germ of an earlier Russian concept, developed a weapon that was short, light, and fired its magazine of 30 bullets at a practical rate of more than 100 rounds per minute. Hitler was so impressed with the weapon he'd previously forbidden that he named it the Sturmgewehr, or storm weapon, and immediately ordered its intensive production. It was too little, too late for the Nazi war effort, but Schmeisser's storm weapon set the trend for all assault rifles for the rest of the century. Kalashnikov's AK-47, the most influential and widely manufactured of the new assault rifles, operated by diverting some of the propellant gases produced by a fired bullet into a cylinder above the barrel. The gas drove a piston that forced the bolt back against its spring, and cocked the hammer for the next round.
The rifle weighed about 5 kilos, carried 30 rounds in its curved metal magazine, and fired the 7.62mm rounds at around 2,300 feet per second, over an effective range greater than 300 meters. It fired more than 100 rounds per minute on auto, and about 40 rounds every minute on the semi-automatic single-shot function. The rifle had its limitations, and the Mujahedin fighters were quick to explain them to me. The low muzzle velocity of the heavy 7.62mm round defined a looping trajectory that called for tricky adjustments to hit a target at 300 meters or more. Muzzle flash on firing the AK was so bright, particularly with the new 74 series, that it blinded the firer at night, and often betrayed his position. The barrel overheated rapidly, becoming too hot to hold. Sometimes a round grew so hot in the chamber that it exploded in the user's face. That fact explained why so many guerrilla fighters held the gun away from their bodies, or over their heads, in battle operations. Nevertheless, the rifle worked perfectly after total immersion in water, mud, or snow, and it remained one of the most efficient and reliable killing machines ever devised. In the first 4 decades after its development, 50 million of them were produced, more than any other firearm in history, and the Kalashnikov, in all its forms, was carried as a preferred strike weapon by revolutionaries, regular soldiers, mercenaries, and gangsters all over the fighting world. The original Alaska 47 was made of forged and milled steel. The AK-74, produced in the 1970s, was made from stamped metal parts. Some of the older Afghan fighters rejected the newer weapon, with its smaller 5.45mm round and its orange plastic magazine, preferring the solidity of the heavier Alaska 47. Some younger fighters chose the 74 model, dismissing the heavier gun as an antique. The models they used were produced in Egypt, Syria, Russia, and China. Although they were essentially identical, the fighters often preferred one to another, and the trade in the weapons, even within the same unit, was energetic and intense. Kader's workshops repaired and refitted the AKs of every series, and modified them as required. The workshops were popular places. The Afghan men were insatiable in their desire to know about weapons and learn new skills with them.
It wasn't a frenzied or brutal curiosity. It was simply necessary to know how to handle guns in a land that had been invaded by Alexander the Great, the Huns, the Sakas, the Scythians, the Mongols, the Mughals, the Safavids, the British, and the Russians, among many others. Even when they weren't studying at the workshops or helping out with the work, the men gathered there to drink tea made on spirit stoves, smoke cigarettes, and talk about their loved ones. And for 2 months I worked with them every day. I melted lead and other metals in the little forge. I helped to gather scraps of firewood and carried water from a spring at the foot of a nearby ravine. Trudging through the light snow, I dug out new latrines and carefully covered them over and concealed them again when they were full. I turned new parts on the turret lathe and melted the helical metal shavings to make more parts. In the mornings I tended to the horses, which were billeted in another cave further down the mountain. When it was my turn to milk the goats, I churned the milk into butter and helped to cook naan bread. If any man needed attention for a cut or graze or sprained ankle, I set up the first aid kit and did my best to heal him. I learned the answering choruses of a few songs, and in the evenings when the fires were smothered and we huddled together for warmth, I sang with the men as softly as they did. I listened to the stories that they whispered into the dark and that Khalid, Mahmud, and Nazir translated for me. Each day when the men prayed, I knelt with them in silence.
And at night, enclosed within the breathing, snoring swath of their soldier-scented sleep, smells of wood smoke, gun oil, cheap sandalwood soap, piss, shit, sweat soaking into wet serge, unwashed human and horse hair, liniment and saddle softener, cumin and coriander, peppermint tooth powder, chai, tobacco, and 100 others, I dreamed with them of homes and hearts we longed to see again.
Then, when the second month ended, and the last weapons were repaired and modified, and the supplies we'd brought with us were all but exhausted, Qadarbhai ordered us to prepare for the long walk home. He planned to make a detour west, toward Kandahar and away from the border with Pakistan, to deliver some horses to his family. After that, with marching packs and light weapons, we would march by night until we reached the safety of the Pakistan border. The horses are nearly loaded, I reported to Kader when I'd packed my own gear. Khalid and Nazir will be back up here when it's all done. They told me to let you know. We were on the flattened top of a tor that gave a commanding view of the valleys and then the desert plain that stretched from the foot of the mountains all the way to Kandahar at the horizon. For once, the cloudy mists and snow had cleared enough for us to take in the whole, panoramic sweep of the view. There were dark, thick clouds massed to the east of us, and the cold air was damp with the rain and snow they would bring, but for the moment we could see all the way to the end of the world, and our wintry eyes were drowning in the beauty of it. In November of 1878, the same month that we started this mission, the British forced their way through the Khyber Pass, and the Second Afghan War with them began, Kader said, ignoring my report, or perhaps responding to it in his own way. He stared toward the ripple of haze on the horizon caused by the smoke and fire of distant Kandahar.
I knew that some of the horizon's shimmer and drizzle might have been exploding rockets, fired into the city by men who'd lived there once as teachers and merchants.
In the war against the Russian invaders, they'd become devils in exile, raining fire upon their own homes and shops and schools. Through Khyber Pass, there came one of the most feared, brave, and brutal soldiers in the whole British Raj. His name was Roberts, Lord Frederick Roberts. He captured Kabul and began a ruthless martial law there. On one day, 87 Afghan soldiers were killed by hanging in the public square. Buildings and markets were destroyed, villages were burned, and hundreds of Afghan people were killed. In June, an Afghan prince named Ayub Khan announced a jihad to drive out the British. He left Herat with 10,000 men. He was an ancestor of mine, a man of my family, and many of my kinsmen were in the army that he raised. He stopped talking and flicked a glance at me, his golden eyes gleaming beneath the silver-gray brows. His eyes were smiling, but his jaw was set and his lips were compressed so tightly that they showed white at the rims. Reassured, perhaps, that I was listening to him, he looked back to the smoldering horizon and spoke again. The British officer in charge of Kandahar city at that time, a man named Burroughs, was 63 years old, the same age that I am today. He marched out of Kandahar with 1,500 men, British and Indian soldiers, and he met Prince Ayub at a place called Maiwand. You can see the place from here, where we sit, when the weather is good enough. In the battle, both armies fired cannons, killing hundreds of men in the most terrible ways that can be imagined. When they met each other, as one man to another man, they fired their guns at such close range that the bullets went through one body to strike the next. The British lost half their number. The Afghans lost 2,500 men. But they won the battle, and the British were forced to retreat to Kandahar. Prince Ayub immediately surrounded the city, and the siege of Kandahar began. It was cold, bitterly cold on the windy tour, despite the unusually bright, clear sunlight. I felt my legs and arms growing numb, and I longed to stand up and stamp my feet, but I didn't want to disturb him. Instead, I lit 2 bidis and passed one to him. He accepted it, raising his eyebrow in thanks, and took 2 long puffs before continuing. Lord Roberts. Do you know something? Lynn, my first teacher, my dear Mackenzie Esquire, always said this thing. Bob's your uncle, all the time, and it became a thing that I also said, to imitate him. Then, one day, he told me that the saying came from him, from Lord Frederick Roberts, because, you see, the man who killed my people in hundreds was so kind to his own soldiers that they called him Uncle Bob's. And they said that if he was in charge, everything would be well. Bob's your uncle. I never said that again, not ever, after he told me that. And something that is very strange, my dear Mackenzie Esquire was the grandson of a man who fought in the army of Lord Roberts. His grandfather and my kinsman fought each other in the Second British War against Afghanistan. That is why Mackenzie Esquire had such fascination for the history of my country and such knowledge about the wars. And, thanks be to Allah, I did have him as my friend and my teacher, while men were still alive who bore the scars of fighting the war that killed his grandfather and killed mine. He paused again, and we listened to the wind, feeling the first sting of the new snow that it was bringing to us. The shivering wind that began in distant Bamiyan, and dragged the snow and ice and frosty air from every mountain all the way to Kandahar. And so Lord Roberts went from Kabul, with a force of 10,000 men, to relieve the siege of Kandahar.
2/3 of his men were Indian soldiers, and they were good fighting men, those Indian sepoys.
Roberts marched them from Kabul to Kandahar, a distance of 300 miles, in 22 days. Much more than the distance we covered, you and I, from Chaman, on our journey, and you know that took us a month, with good horses, and help from villages along the way. And they marched, from freezing snow mountains to burning desert, and then, after 20 days of this unbelievable march through hell, they fought a great battle with the army of Prince Ayub Khan, and they defeated him. Roberts saved the British in the city, and from that day, even after he became the field marshal of all the soldiers in the British Empire, he was always known as Roberts of Kandahar. Was Prince Ayub killed? No, he escaped. Then the British put his close kinsman Abdul Rahman Khan on the throne of Afghanistan. Abdul Rahman Khan, also an ancestor of mine, ruled the country with such a special wisdom that the British had no real power in Afghanistan. The situation was exactly the same as it was before the great soldier and great killer, Bob's your uncle, forced his way through the Khyber Pass to fight the war. But the point of this story, now that we sit here and look at the fires of my burning city, is that Kandahar is the key to Afghanistan. Kabul is the heart, but Kandahar is the soul of this nation, and who rules Kandahar also rules Afghanistan. When the Russians are forced to leave my city, they will lose this war. Not until then. I hate it all, I sighed, sure in my own mind that the new war would change nothing. That wars can't really change things. It's peace that makes the deepest cuts, I thought. And I remember thinking it. I remember thinking that it was a clever phrase, and hoping for a chance to work it into our conversation. I remember everything about that day. I remember every word, and all those foolish, vain, unwary thoughts, as if fate had just now slapped my face with them. I hate it all, and I'm glad we're going home today. Who are your friends here? He asked me. The question surprised me, and I couldn't guess at his intention. Reading my baffled expression, and clearly amused, he asked me again. Of those you have come to know here, on this mountain, who are your friends? Well, Khalid, obviously, and Nazir. So, Nazir is your friend now? Yeah, I laughed. He's a friend. And I like Ahmed Zadeh. And Mahmoud Melbaf, the Iranian. And Suleiman is okay, and Jalalad. He's a wild kid, and Zar Rasul, the farmer. Kader nodded as I ran through the list, but when he made no comment I felt moved to speak again. They're all good men, I think. Everyone here. But those are the men I get on with the best. Is that what you mean? What is your favorite task here? He asked, changing the subject as quickly and unexpectedly as his portly friend Abdul Ghani might have done. My favorite, it's crazy, and I never thought I'd ever say this, but I think tending the horses is my favorite job. He smiled, and the smile bubbled into a laugh. I was sure, somehow, that he was thinking about the night I'd ridden into the camp hanging from the neck of my horse. Okay, I grinned, I'm not the best horseman in the world. He laughed the harder. But I really started to miss them when we got here and you told us to stable the horses down the mountain. It's funny. I sort of got used to them being around, and it's always made me feel good, somehow, going down to see them and brush them and feed them. I understand, he murmured, reading my eyes. Tell me, when the others are praying and you join them, I've seen you sometimes, kneeling behind them and not very close, what words are you saying? Are they prayers? I'm not really saying anything at all, I replied, frowning. I lit 2 more beaties, not for the need of them, but for the distraction they provided, and their little warmth. What are you thinking, then, if you're not speaking? He asked, accepting the second cigarette as he tossed away the butt of the first. I couldn't call them prayers. I don't think so. I think about people, mostly. I think about my mother and my daughter. I think about Abdullah and Prabhakar. I've told you about him, my friend who died. I remember friends and people I love. You think about your mother. What about your father? No. I said it quickly, too quickly, perhaps, and I felt him watching me closely as the seconds passed. Is your father living, Lynn? I think so. But I can't be sure. And I don't care, one way or the other. You must care about your father, he declared, looking away again. It seemed such a condescending admonition to me then. He knew nothing about my father or my relationship to him. I was so caught up in resentments, new and old, that I didn't hear the anguish in his voice. I didn't realize, as I do now, that he, too, was an exiled son talking about his own father. You're more of a father to me than he is, I said, and although I felt it to be true, and I was opening my heart to him, the words came out sounding sulky and almost spiteful. Don't say that, he snapped, glaring at me. It was the closest he ever came to showing anger in my presence, and I flinched involuntarily at the sudden vehemence. His expression softened at once, and he reached out to put a hand on my shoulder. What about your dreams? What are you dreaming about here? Dreams? Yes. Tell me about your dreams. I'm not having many, I replied, trying hard to recall. It's weird, you know, but I've had nightmares for a long time, pretty much since the escape from jail. Nightmares about being caught, or fighting to stop them catching me.
But since we've been up here, I don't know if it's the thin air, or being so damn tired and cold when I get to sleep, or maybe just worry about the war, but I'm not having those nightmares.
Not here. I've had a couple of good dreams, in fact. Go on. I didn't want to go on. The dreams had been about Carla. Just happy dreams, about being in love. Good, he murmured, nodding several times, and taking his hand from my shoulder. He seemed satisfied with my reply, but his expression was downcast and almost grim. I, too, have had dreams here. I dreamed about the Prophet. We Muslims, you know, we are not supposed to tell anyone if we dream about the Prophet. It is a very good thing, a very wonderful thing, and quite common among the faithful, but we are forbidden to tell what we have dreamed. Why? I asked, shivering in the cold. It is because we are strictly forbidden to describe the features of the Prophet or to talk about him as someone who is seen. This was the Prophet's own wish, so that no man or woman would adore him or take any of their devotions away from God. That is why there are no images of the Prophet, no drawings, or paintings, or statues. But I did dream of him. And I am not a very good Muslim, am I? Because I am telling you about my dream. He was on foot, walking somewhere. I rode up behind him on my horse. It was a perfect, beautiful white horse, and although I didn't see his face, I knew it was him. So I got down from my horse and gave it to him. And my face was lowered, out of respect, all the time. But at last, I lifted my eyes to see him riding away into the light of the setting sun. That was my dream. He was calm, but I knew him well enough to see the dejection that hooded his eyes. And there was something else, something so new and strange that it took me a few moments to realize what it was. Fear. Abdul Qadir Khan was afraid, and I felt my own skin creep and tighten in response. It was unimaginable. Until that moment I truly believed that Qadir was afraid of nothing. Unnerved and worried, I moved to change the subject. Qadir, I know I'm changing the subject, but can you answer this question for me? I've been thinking about something you said a while ago. You said that life and consciousness and all that other stuff comes from light, at the Big Bang. Are you saying that light is God? No, he answered, and that sudden, fearful depression lifted from his features, driven off by a look that I could only read as a loving smile. I do not think that light is God. I think it is possible, and it is reasonable to say, that light is the language of God. Light may be the way that God speaks to the universe, and to us. I congratulated myself on the successful change of theme and mood by standing up. I stamped my feet and slapped at my sides to get the blood moving. Qadir joined me and we began the short walk back to the camp, blowing warmth into our frozen hands. This is a strange light. Speaking about light, I puffed. The sun shines, but it's a cold sun. There's no warmth in it, and you feel stranded between the cold sun and the even colder shadows. Beached there in tangles of flicker. Qadir quoted, and I snapped my head around so quickly that I felt a twinge of pain in my neck. What did you say? It was a quote, Qadir replied slowly, sensing how important it was to me. It is a line from a poem. I pulled my wallet from my pocket, reached into it, and took out a folded paper. The page was so creased and rubbed by wear that when I opened it the fold lines showed gaps and tears. It was Carla's poem. The one I'd copied from her journal, 2 years before, when I went to her apartment with Tariq on the night of the wild dogs. I'd carried it with me ever since. In Arthur Road Prison, the officers had taken the page from me and torn it into pieces. When Vikram bribed my way out of the prison, I wrote it out again from memory, and I carried it with me every day, everywhere I went. Carla's poem. This poem, I said excitedly, holding the tattered, fluttering sheet out for him to see. It was written by a woman named Carla Saarinen. The woman you sent to Guptaji's place with Nazir to get me out of there. I'm amazed that you know it. It's incredible. No, Lynn, he answered evenly. The poem was written by a Sufi poet named Sadiq Khan. I know his poems by heart, many of them. He is my favorite poet. And he is Carla's favorite poet also. The words were ice around my heart. Carla's favorite poet? I do believe so. Just how well do you know Carla? I know her very well. I thought you met her when you got me out of Gupta's.
She said.
I thought she said that was when she met you. No, Lynn, that is not correct. I have known Carla for years. She works for me. Or at least, she works for Abdul Ghani, and Ghani works for me. But she must have told you about it, didn't she? Didn't you know this? I am very surprised. I was sure that Carla would have talked to you about me. Certainly, I have talked to her about you, many times. My mind was like the screaming jets that had screeched over us in the dark ravine. All noise and black fears. What had Carla said as we lay together, struggling against sleep, after fighting the cholera epidemic? I was on a plane, and I met a businessman, an Indian businessman, and my life changed forever. Was that Abdul Ghani? Is that what she meant? Why hadn't I asked her more about her work? Why didn't she tell me about it? And what did she do for Abdul Ghani? What does she do for you, for Abdul? Many things. She has many skills. I know about her skills, I growled at him angrily. What does she do for you? Among other things, Qadir answered. Slowly and precisely, she finds useful and talented foreigners, such as you are. She finds people who can work for us when we need them. What? I asked, gasping out the word that wasn't really a question, and feeling as if pieces of myself Frozen pieces of my face and my heart were falling splintered around me. He began to speak again, but I cut him off quickly. Are you saying that Carla recruited me for you? Yes, she did. And I am very glad that she did. The cold was suddenly inside me, running through my veins, and my eyes were made of snow. Kader kept walking, but when he noticed that I'd stopped, he halted. He was still smiling when he turned to face me. Khalid Ansari approached us at that instant, and clapped his hands together loudly. Kader. Lynn. He greeted us with the sad, small smile that I'd come to love. I've made up my mind. I gave it some thought, Kaderji, just like you said, but I've decided to stay. At least for a while. Habib was here last night. The sentries saw him. He's been doing so much crazy stuff. The things he's done to Russian prisoners, and even some of the Afghan prisoners near here on the Kandahar road in the last couple weeks are, well, it's grisly shit. And I'm hard to impress in that way. It's so weird, the men are going to do something about it. They're so spooked, they're gonna shoot him on sight. They're talking about hunting him down like a wild animal. I have to try to help him, somehow. I'm gonna stay, and try to find him, and try to talk him into coming back to Pakistan with me. So, you go on without me tonight, and I'll come through in a couple of weeks, on the next trip out. That's it, I guess. That's what I came to say. There was a cold silence after the little speech. I stared at Kader, waiting for him to speak. I was angry, and I was afraid. It was a special fear, the kind of Arctic dread that only love can inspire. Kader stared back at my face, reading me. Khalid looked from one to the other of us, confused and concerned. What about the night I met you and Abdullah? I asked, speaking through teeth clenched against the cold and the even colder fear that ripped through me like spasms of cramp. You forget, Kader Khan replied a little more sternly. His face was as dark and determined as my own. It never occurred to me then that he, too, was feeling deceived and betrayed. I'd forgotten about Karachi and the police raids. I'd forgotten that there was a traitor in his own circle, someone close to him, who'd tried to have him and me and the rest of us captured or killed. I never saw his grim detachment as anything but a cruel disregard for what I felt. You met Abdullah a long time before the night that we met. You met him at the Temple of the Standing Babas, isn't it true? He was there to look after Carla on that night. She did not know you well. She was not sure of you, not sure that she could trust you, in a place that she did not know. She wanted someone there who could help her if you had no good intention with her. He was her bodyguard, I muttered, thinking she didn't trust me. Yes, Lynn, he was, and a good one. I understand it that there was some violence on that night. Abdullah did do something to save her, and perhaps to save you. Isn't that true? This was Abdullah's job, to protect the people for me. That is why I sent him to follow you when my nephew Tariq went to stay with you in the Jopatpati. And on the very first night, he did help you to fight some wild dogs, isn't it true? And for the whole time that Tariq was with you, Abdullah was close to you and to Tariq, just as I told him to be. I wasn't listening. My mind was all angry arrows, whistling backward to a much earlier time and place. I was searching for Carla, for the Carla I knew and loved, but every moment with her began to give up its secret and its lie. I remembered the first time I'd met her, the first second, how she'd reached out to stop me from walking in front of the bus. It was on Arthur Bunder Road, on the corner near the causeway, not far from the India guest house. It was the heart of the tourist beat. Was she waiting there, hunting for foreigners like me, looking for useful recruits who could work for Kader when he needed them? Of course she was. I'd done it myself, in a way, when I'd lived in the slum. I'd loitered there, in the same place, looking for foreigners just off the plane who wanted to change money or buy some charas. Nazir walked up to join us. Ahmed Zadeh was a few paces behind him. They stood together with Kaderbai and Khalid, facing me. Nazir screwed his face into a scowl, and scanned the sky from south to north, calculating the minutes before the snowstorm hit us. The packing for the return journey was complete and double-checked, and he was anxious to leave. And the help you gave me with the clinic? I asked, feeling sick, and knowing that if I unlocked my knees and let my legs relax, they would crumple and fold beneath me. When Cater didn't speak, I repeated the question. What about the clinic? Why did you help me with the clinic? Was that part of your plan? Of this plan? A freezing wind blew into the broad plateau, and we all shuddered, unsteadied, as the force of it whipped at our clothes and faces. The sky darkened swiftly as a dirty, gray tide of cloud crossed the mountains and tumbled on toward the distant plain and the shimmering, dying city. You did good work there, he replied. That's not what I asked you. I don't think this is the right time to talk of such things, Lin. Yes, it is, I insisted. There are things you will not understand, he stated, as if he'd thought it through many times. Just tell me. Very well. All of the medicine that we brought here to this camp, all of the antibiotics and penicillin for the war, was supplied to us by Ranjit's lepers. I had to know if it was safe to use here. Ah, Jesus? I moaned. So I used the opportunity, the strange fact that you, a foreigner, with no connection to a family or an embassy, set up a clinic in my own slum. I took that chance to test the supplies on the people in the Jopatpati. I had to be sure, you understand, before I brought the medicines into the war. For God's sake, Cater. I snarled. I had to be. Only a fucking maniac would do that. Take it easy, Lin. Khalid snapped back at me. The other men tensed on either side of Cater, as if they feared that I might attack him. You're way out of line, man. I'm out of line. I spluttered, feeling my teeth chatter, and struggling to make my numb limbs obey my mind. I'm out of fucking line. He uses the people in the slum as guinea pigs or lab rats or whatever the fuck, to test his antibiotics. Using me to trick them into doing it, because they believed in me, and I'm the one who's out of line. No one got hurt, Khalid shouted back at me. The medicines were all good, and the work you did there was good. People got well. We should get out of the cold, now, and talk about it, Ahmedzadeh put in quickly, hoping to conciliate. Cater, you'll have to wait for this snow to clear before you leave. Let's get inside. You must understand, Cater said firmly, ignoring him. It was a decision of war. 20 lives risked against the saving of 1,000, and 1,000 risked to save 1,000,000. And you must believe me, we knew that the medicines were good. The chance of Ranjit's lepers supplying impure medicines was very low. We were almost completely sure that the medicine was safe when we gave it to you. Tell me about Sapna. There it was, out in the open, my deepest secret fear about him and about my closeness to him. Was that your work, too? I was not Sapna, but the responsibility for his killings does come back to me. Sapna killed for me, for this cause. And if you want me to tell you the whole of the truth, I did make a great benefit from Sapna's bloody work. Because of Sapna, because he existed, and because of their fear of him, and because I made a commitment to find him and stop him, the politicians and the police allowed me to bring guns and other weapons through Bombay to Karachi and Quetta, and to this war. The blood Sapna spilled, it did oil the wheels for us. And I would do this again. I would use Sapna's killings, and I would do more killings, with my own hands, if it would help our cause. We have a cause, Lin, all of us here. And we fight and we live, and perhaps we will also die for that cause. If we win this fight, we will change the whole of history, forever, from this time, and in this place, and with these battles. That is our cause, to change the whole world. What is your cause? What is your cause, Lin? I was so cold, as the first flakes whirled about us, that I shivered and shook and couldn't stop my jaw from shuddering. What about Madame Joe, when Carla got me to pretend I was an American? Was that your idea? Was that your plan? No, Carla has her own war with Joe, and she had her own reasons. But I approved of her plan to use you, to get her friend out of the palace. I wanted to see if you could do it. I had the thought, even then, that you would one day be my American in Afghanistan. And you did well, Lin. Not many people do so well against Joe in her own palace. One last thing, Cater, I stammered. When I was in jail, did you have anything to do with that? There was a hard silence, the kind of deadly, breathing silence that insinuates itself into the memory more deeply than the sharpest sound. No, he replied at last. But the truth is that I could have taken you out of there, even after the first week, if I chose to do it. I knew about it almost at once. And I had the power to help you, but I did not. Not when I could have done it. I looked at Nazir and Ahmedzadeh. They stared back evenly. My eyes shifted to Khaled Ansari. He returned my stare with an anguished and angrily defiant grimace that pulled his whole face into the jagged lash of the scar that divided his features. They all knew that Kader had left me in there. But it was okay. Kader didn't owe me anything. He wasn't the one who put me there. He didn't have to get me out. And he did, in the end. He did get me out of jail in the end, and he did save my life.
It was just that I'd taken so many beatings, and other men had taken beatings for me, trying to get a message out to him. And even if we'd succeeded, even if we'd managed to get a message to him, Kader would have ignored it, and left me there, until he was ready to act.
It was just that all the hope had been so empty, so meaningless. And if you prove to a man how vain his hope is, how vain his hoping was, you kill the bright, believing part of him that wants to be loved. You wanted to be sure that I'd be so grateful to you. So you left me there. Was that it? No, Lynn. It was just unfortunate, just your kismet at that time. I had an arrangement with Madame Jo. She was helping us to meet with the politicians and get favors from one of the generals from Pakistan. He was a contact of hers. He was, in truth, Carla's special client.
She was the one who first brought him, that Pakistani general, to Madame Jo. And it was a critical connection.
He was critically important to my plans. And she was so very angry with you, Madame Jo, that nothing less than prison would satisfy her. She wanted to have you killed in there. As soon as my work was done, at the earliest day, I sent your friend Vikram for you. You must believe me when I tell you that I never wanted to hurt you. I like you. He stopped suddenly because I put my hand on the holster at my hip. Khaled, Ahmed, and Nazir tensed at once and raised their hands, but they were too far away to reach me in a single springing leap, and they knew it. If you don't turn around and walk away now, Kader, I swear to God, I'll do something that'll finish us both. I don't care what happens to me, just so long as I don't have to look at you, or speak to you, or listen to you, ever again. Nazir took a slow, almost casual step, and stood in front of Kader, shielding him with his body. I swear to God, Kader. Right now, I don't care much if I live or die. But we're leaving now, for Chaman, when the snow clears, Kader replied, and it was the only time I ever heard his voice waver and falter. I mean it, I'm not going with you. I'm staying here. I'll go on my own. Or I'll stay here. It doesn't matter. Just get the fuck out of my sight. It's making me sick to my stomach to look at you. He stood his ground a moment more, and I could feel the urge to take the gun out and shoot him, an urge that was drowning me in cold, shivering waves of revulsion and rage. You must know this, he said at last, whatever wrong I have done, I did for the right reasons. I never did more to you than I thought you could bear. And you should know, you must know, that I always felt for you as if you were my friend and my beloved son. And you should know this, I answered him, the snow thickening on my hair and shoulders. I hate you with the whole of my heart, Kader. All your wisdom, that's just what it comes down to, isn't it? Putting hate in people. You asked me what my cause is. The only cause I've got is my own freedom. And right now that means being free of you, forever. His face was stiff with cold. Snow had settled on his mustache and beard, and it was impossible to read his expression. But his golden eyes gleamed through the gray-white mist, and the old love was in them still. Then he turned, and he was gone. The others turned with him, and I was alone in the storm with my hand frozen and trembling on the holster. I snapped the safety clip off, pulled the Stechkin out, and cocked it quickly and expertly, just as he'd taught me. I held it at my side, pointed at the ground. The minutes passed, the killing minutes, when I might have gone after him and killed him, and myself. And I tried to drop the gun then, but it wouldn't fall from my numbed and icy fingers. I tried to prise the gun free with my left hand, but all my fingers were so cramped that I gave it up. And in the whirling white snow dome that my world had become, I lifted my arms to the white rain, as I once had done beneath the warm rain in Crabacre's village. And I was alone. When I'd climbed the wall of the prison all those years before, it was as if I'd climbed a wall on the rim of the world. When I slid down to freedom, I lost the whole world that I knew, and all the love it held. In Bombay I'd tried, without realizing it, to make a new world of loving that could resemble the lost one, and even replace it. Kader was my father. Prabhakar and Abdullah were my brothers. Carla was my lover. And then, one by one, they were all lost. Another whole world was lost. A clear thought came to me, unbidden, and surging in my mind like the spoken words of a poem. I knew why Khalid Ansari was so determined to help Habib. I suddenly knew with perfect understanding what Khalid was really trying to do. He's trying to save himself, I said, more than once, feeling my numb lips tremble with the words, but hearing them in my head. And I knew, as I said the words and thought them, that I didn't hate Kader or Carla. That I couldn't hate them. I don't know why my heart changed so suddenly and so completely. It might have been the gun in my hand, the power it gave me to take life, or let it be, and the instincts, from my deepest nature, that had prevented me from using it. It might have been the fact of losing Kaderbai. For, as he walked away from me, I knew in my blood, the blood I could smell in the thick, white air, the blood I could taste in my mouth, that it was over. Whatever the reason, the change moved through me like monsoon rain in the steel bazaar, and left no trace of the swirling, murderous hate I'd felt only moments before. I was still angry that I'd put so much of a son's love into Kader, and that my soul, against the wishes of my conscious mind, had begged for his love. I was angry that he'd considered me expendable, to be used as a means to achieve his ends. And I was enraged that he'd taken away the one thing in my whole life, my work as the slum doctor. That might have redeemed me, in my own mind if nowhere else, and might have gone some way to balance all the wrong I'd done. Even that little good had been polluted and defiled. The anger in me was as hard and heavy as a basalt hearthstone, and I knew it would take years to wear down, but I couldn't hate them. They'd lied to me and betrayed me, leaving jagged edges where all my trust had been, and I didn't like or respect or admire them anymore, but still I loved them. I had no choice. I understood that, perfectly, standing in the white wilderness of snow. You can't kill love. You can't even kill it with hate. You can kill in love, and loving, and even loveliness. You can kill them all, or numb them into dense, leaden regret, but you can't kill love itself. Love is the passionate search for a truth other than your own, and once you feel it, honestly and completely, love is forever. Every act of love, every moment of the heart reaching out, is a part of the universal good. It's a part of God, or what we call God, and it can never die. Afterwards, when the snow cleared, I stood a little apart from Khalid to watch Kaderbai and Nazir and their men leave the camp with the horses. The great Khan, the Mafia Don, my father, sat straight-backed in his saddle. He held his standard, furled about the lance in his hand. And he never once looked back. My decision to separate myself from Kaderbai and to stay with Khalid and the others in the camp had increased the danger for me. I was far more vulnerable without the Khan than I was in his company. It was reasonable to assume, watching him leave, that I wouldn't make it back to Pakistan.
I even said those words to myself. I'm not gonna make it.
I'm not gonna make it. But it wasn't fear that I felt as Lord Abdul Qadir Khan rode into the light-consuming snow. I accepted my fate, and even welcomed it. At last, I thought, I'm gonna get what I deserve. Somehow, that thought left me clean and clear. What I felt, instead of fear, was hope that he would live. It was over and finished, and I never wanted to see him again, but as I watched him ride into that valley of white shadows I hoped he would live. I prayed he would be safe. I prayed my heartbreak into him, and I loved him. I loved him. Chapter 35. Men wage wars for profit and principle, but they fight them for land and women. Sooner or later, the other causes and compelling reasons drown in blood and lose their meaning. Sooner or later, death and survival clog the senses. Sooner or later, surviving is the only logic and dying is the only voice and vision.
Then, when best friends die screaming, and good men maddened with pain and fury lose their minds in the bloody pit, when all the fairness and justice and beauty in the world is blown away with arms and legs and heads of brothers and sons and fathers, then, what makes men fight on, and die, and keep on dying, year after year, is the will to protect the land and the women.
You know that's true when you listen to them, in the hours before they go into battle. They talk about home, and they talk about the women they love. And you know it's true when you watch them die. If he's near the earth or on the earth in the last moments, a dying man reaches out for it, to squeeze a grasp of soil in his hand. If he can, he'll raise his head to look at the mountain, the valley, or the plain. If he's a long way from home, he'll think about it, and he'll talk about it. He'll talk about his village, or his hometown, or the city where he grew up. The land matters, at the end. And at the very last, he won't scream of causes. At the very last, he'll murmur or he'll cry out the name of a sister or a daughter or a lover or a mother, even as he speaks the name of his God. The end mirrors the beginning. In the end, it's a woman and a city. 3 days after Qadarbhai left the camp, 3 days after I watched him ride away from us through the soft new snow, sentries at the southern lookout on the Kandahar side of the camp shouted that men were approaching. We rushed to the southern edge to see a lumpy confusion of shapes, perhaps 2 or 3 human figures, struggling up the steep slope. Several of us reached for binoculars in the same instant and trained them on the spot. I made out one man crawling, inching his way up the slope on his knees, and dragging 2 prone figures. After a few moments of study, I recognized the powerful shoulders, the bowed legs, and the distinctive gray-blue fatigues. I handed the binoculars to Khalid Ansari and bounded over the edge in a sliding run. "It's Nazir!" I shouted. "I think it's Nazir." I was one of the first to reach him. He was face down in the snow, and he was breathing hard. His legs were pushing against the snow, seeking purchase, and his hands were locked in wraps of clothing at the throats of 2 men. He dragged them to that spot on their backs, one in each hand. It was impossible to guess how far he'd come, but it looked to be a long way, most of it uphill. The man in Nazir's left hand, nearest to me, was Ahmed Zadeh. He was alive, but seemed to be badly wounded. The other man was Abdul Qadir Khan. He was dead. It took 3 of us to wrench Nazir's fingers from the clothes. He was so exhausted and so cold that he couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed, but the voice was a long, unsteady croak. 2 men seized the shoulders of his clothes and dragged him back up to the camp. I pulled open Qadir's clothes at the chest, hoping to revive him, but when I put my hand on his body, the skin was ice cold and stiffened and woody. He'd been dead for many hours, perhaps more than a day. The body was rigid. The arms and legs were bent a little at the elbows and knees, and the hands were curled into claws. His face, however, was serene and unblemished beneath its thin shroud of snow. His eyes and his mouth were closed as if in a peaceful sleep, and he was so gently dead that my heart refused to believe him gone. When Khalid Ansari shook my shoulder, I came to the moment as if from a dream, although I knew that I'd been awake for the whole of the time since the sentries had first given us the alarm. I was kneeling in the snow, against Qadir's body, and cradling the handsome head in my arms, against my chest, but I had no recollection of doing it. Ahmed Zadeh was gone. Men had dragged him back to the camp. Khalid, Mahmud, and I dragged and half-carried Qadir's body back with us and into the big cave.
I joined a group of 3 men who were working on Ahmed Zadeh. The Algerian's clothes were stiff with frozen blood around the middle, below the chest.
Piece by piece we cut them away, and just as we reached the torn, minced, bloody wounds on his raw skin, he opened his eyes to look at us. "I'm wounded," he said in French, then Arabic, then English. "Yes, mate," I answered him, meeting his eyes. I tried a little smile, but it felt numb and awkward, and I'm sure he drew little comfort from it. There were at least 3 wounds, but it was difficult to be sure. His abdomen had been ripped open with a vicious, gouging tear that might have been caused by shrapnel from a mortar shell.
For all that I could tell, the piece of metal could have been inside him, nudging up against his spine. There were other gaping wounds in his thigh and groin.
He'd lost so much blood that his flesh was curled and gray around the wounds. I couldn't begin to guess what damage had been done to his stomach and other internal organs. There was a strong smell of urine and other wastes and fluids. That he'd survived so long was a miracle. It seemed that the cold alone had kept him alive. But the clock was ticking on him. He had hours or only minutes to live, and there was nothing I could do for him. It is very bad? Yes, mate, I answered him, and I couldn't help it. My voice broke as I said it. There's nothing I can do. I wish now that I didn't say it. Of the 100 things that I wish I'd never said or done in my wicked life, that little quirk of honesty is right up there, near the top of the list. I hadn't realized how much the hope of being rescued had held him up. And then, with those words of mine, I watched him fall backward into the black lake. The color left his skin, and the small tension of wool that had kept his skin taut collapsed, with little twitches of quivering surrender, from his jaw to his knees. I wanted to prepare an injection of morphine for him, but I knew that I was watching him die, and I couldn't bring myself to take my hand from his. His eyes cleared, and he looked around him at the cave walls as if seeing them for the first time. Mahmoud and Khalid were on one side of him. I knelt on the other. He looked into our faces. His eyes were starting from their sockets with fear. It was the desolate terror of a man who knows that fate has abandoned him, and death's already inside, stretching and swelling and filling up the life space that used to be his.
It was a look I came to know too well in the weeks that followed, and in the years beyond. But there, on that day, it was new to me, and I felt my scalp tighten with a fear that mimed his. It should have been donkeys, he rasped.
What? Cater should have used donkeys. I told him that from the beginning. You heard me. You all heard me. Yes, mate. Donkeys, on this kind of job. I grew up in the mountains. I know the mountains. Yes, mate. It should have been donkeys. Yes, I said again, not knowing how to respond. But he was too proud, Kader Khan. He wanted to feel, the moment, the returning hero, for his people. He wanted to bring horses to them, so many fine horses. He stopped talking, choked by a little series of grunting gasps that began in his wounded stomach, and thumped upwards into his stuttering chest. A trickle of dark fluid, blood and bile, dribbled from his nose and the corner of his mouth. He seemed not to notice.
For that, only, we went back to Pakistan in the wrong direction.
For that, to deliver those horses to his people, we went to die. He closed his eyes, moaning in pain, but then just as quickly opened them again. If not for those horses, we would have gone east, toward the border, direct toward the border. It was his pride, do you see? I looked up, exchanging a glance with Khalid and Mahmoud.
Khalid met my eye, but then shifted his gaze quickly to concentrate on his dying friend.
Mahmoud held my stare until we both nodded. It was a gesture so subtle that it would have been imperceptible to an observer, but we both knew what we'd acknowledged and what we'd agreed upon with that little nod. It was true. It was pride that had brought the great man to his end. And strange as it may seem to someone else, it was only then, understanding the pride in his fall, that I began to truly accept that Qadarbai was gone, and to feel the gaping, hollow sense of his death. Ahmed talked for a while longer. He told us the name of his village, and he gave us directions for how to find it in relation to the nearest big city. He told us about his father and mother, about his sisters and brothers. He wanted us to let them know that he'd died thinking of them. And he did, that brave, laughing Algerian, who'd always looked as though he was searching for a friend in a crowd of strangers. He did die with his mother's love on his lips. And the name of God escaped with his last breath. We were freezing, chilled to the bones by the stillness we'd assumed while Ahmed lay dying. Other men took over the task of cleaning his body according to the rituals of Muslim burial. Khalid, Mahmoud, and I checked on Nazir. He wasn't wounded, but he was so utterly and crushingly exhausted that his sleep resembled that of a man in a coma. His mouth was open, and his eyes were slitted to show the whites within. He was warm, and he seemed to be recovering from his ordeal. We left him, and examined the body of our dead Khan. A single bullet had entered Kader's side, below the ribs, and seemed to have traveled directly to his heart. There was no exit wound, but there was extensive blood coagulation and bruising on the left side of his chest. The bullet fired by Russian AK-74s in those years had a hollow tip. The steel core of the bullet was weighted towards the rear, causing it to tumble. It crashed and ripped its way into a body, rather than simply piercing it. Such ammunition was banned under international law, but almost every one of the Afghans who was killed in battle bore the terrible wounds of those brutal bullets. So it was with our Khan. The bullet had smashed its way through his body. The gaping, jagged wound in his side had left a streak of bruising across his chest that ended in a blue-black lotus over his heart.
Knowing that Nazir would want to prepare Kaderbai's body for burial himself, we wrapped the Khan in blankets and left him in a shallow, scooped-out trench of snow near the entrance to the caves.
We just finished the task when a warbling, fluttering, whistle of sound drew us to our feet. We looked at one another in fearful confusion. Then a violent explosion shook the ground beneath us with a flash of orange and dirty gray smoke. The mortar shell had struck the ground more than 100 meters away, at the far edge of the compound, but the air near us was already filthy with its smell and smoke. Then a second shell burst, and a third, and we ran for the cave mouth and flung ourselves into the squirming octopus of men who were there ahead of us. Arms, legs, and heads crushed in on one another as we hunkered down in terror while the mortars tore up the rocky ground outside as if it was papier-mâché. It was bad, and it got worse every day after that. When the attack was over, we searched among the blackened stipple and crater of the compound. 2 men were dead. One of them was Karim, the man whose broken forearm I'd set on the night before we'd reached the camp. 2 others were so badly wounded that we were sure they would die. Many of the supplies were destroyed. First among them were the drums of fuel we'd used for the generator and the stoves.
The stoves and lamps were critically important for heating and cooking.
Most of the fuel was gone, and all of our water reserves. We set to cleaning up the debris. My medical kit was blackened and scorched by the fire, and consolidating the remaining supplies in the great cave. The men were quiet. They were worried and afraid. They had reason enough. While others busied themselves with those tasks, I tended to the wounded men. One man had lost a foot and a part of his leg below the knee. There were fragments of shrapnel in his neck and upper arm. He was 18 years old. He joined the unit with his elder brother 6 months before we arrived. His brother had been killed during an attack on a Russian outpost near Kandahar. The boy was dying. I pulled the metal pieces from his body with long stainless steel tweezers and a pair of long-nosed pliers I pilfered from the mechanic's kit. There was nothing substantial that I could do for the savaged leg. I cleaned the wound, and tried to remove as much of the shattered bone as I could wrench free with the pliers. His screams settled on my skin in an oily sweat, and I shivered with every gust of frosty wind. I put sutures into the ragged flesh where clean, hard skin would support them, but there was no way to close the gap over completely. One thick chunk of bone protruded from the lumpy meat. It occurred to me that I should take a saw and hack the long bone off to make a neat wound of the stump, but I wasn't sure if that was the right procedure. I wasn't sure that it wouldn't make the wound worse than it was. I wasn't sure.
And there's only so much screaming you can bring yourself to cause when you're not sure what you're doing.
In the end, I smothered the wound in antibiotic powder and wrapped it in non-adhesive gauze. The second wounded man had taken a blast in the face and throat. His eyes were destroyed, and most of the nose and mouth were gone. In some ways, he resembled Ranjit's lepers, but his wounds were so raw and bloody, and the teeth were so smashed, that